Welcome to Tracking History. This is a series about storytelling, and all the stories share a common link, a link to the railway. We're going to combine oral histories and written stories with personal and museum artifacts to bring Canadian heritage to life. Our first story in Tracking History is the Roy Griers story. Roy has written about his experiences enlisting with the Royal Canadian Air Force and about his harrowing experiences in the skies over Romania in 1944. Roy waited nearly 70 years to tell his story, and we're going to start where Roy grew up, in the Mount Joy School District not far from Ogama. The Mount Joy School is over 100 years old now, and it's been closed for more than 50 years. But this is where Roy started school, and it's where he completed his grade 9 by correspondence. It's a long way from Mount Joy School in rural Saskatchewan to the skies over Europe at the height of World War II. We asked Roy to start his story by telling us why he joined the Royal Canadian Air Force back in the early 1940s.
There was a certain amount of propaganda in those days, and I didn't realize it was that, but you would see pictures of RAF flyers standing beside their Spitfires that looked pretty good. And I only had my grade 9. I had no hope of getting there. So I had to go to school to get up to grade 12. And as for motivation, just adventure, I suppose. A little bit of patriotism maybe, but not much. Of course, everybody wanted to be a pilot, and I was no exception. So when I went for a medical, one test that I failed on was eye test, where the doctor had a pencil and he went like this and stopped. Apparently my eye muscles are a little bit weak, and my eyes would go on and then come back. Well, you can't have that sort of a fellow being a pilot. When he's coming into land, his eyes have got to be where they got to be. And I did want to be an aircrew, so he put that failure behind me, and that's how I got to be a navigator.
By the winter of 1942-1943, Roy's training was over, and he'd been transported by ship to England, where he became part of Great Britain's Royal Air Force. He was soon part of a flight crew flying Halifax bombers. Roy knew the danger. Bomber command losses were about 5% per night in raids over Germany. With 30 trips to complete a tour of duty, the math was easy. In fact, the number of flights for a Halifax bomber before it would be destroyed in battle averaged 21 sorties. Of the thousands of Halifax bombers made, only 4 made it to 100 flights. It was dangerous work, and Roy would fly 32 sorties in total.
I was trained as a navigator, bomb aimer now. But when I got to England, there had been a decision at higher levels that, particularly on the Halifax bomber, that there would be a navigator and a bomb aimer, and there'd be no second pilot. And actually, I pretty well had the choice of which I could be, a bomb aimer or a navigator. And at the time, it seemed to me that, well, it would be easier to be a bomb aimer, and also I would be the pilot's helper, actually a second pilot, really, although it was not specific training, sort of training on the job. And the RAF decided to move the Halifaxes to another squadron, and we were to be re-equipped with B-24s. And in that crew, I was back again being a navigator bomber, which I did both. There are different kinds of way B-24s are turned out. The one that I was in had quite a lot of room at the front and lots of plexiglass, and you could see any direction. And actually, and I had a desk in front of me with my maps on, and I stood up and had my back to one side or the other, just leaning there. I could look back and see towards the tail, or I could look ahead and see where we were coming. And that's where I was when we were running up on the target that last few minutes there, yeah. On this last crew, on the B-24, the crew were first pilot, captain, and second pilot. And we had a wireless operator who was also an air gunner. And we had what we called a waist gunner. He was just ahead of the tail, really. It was on the B-24, there were two big windows, one on each side, and he had two guns, one on this side and one on that side. And then there was the rear gunner, and then there was myself, who was the navigator, bomb aimer. Yeah, that's what our crew was. This particular day, May the 8th, 1944, we knew we were going to be on an operation that night, and we didn't have much to do in the morning, but after dinner there was a briefing which all the crews came to that were going to be on that night's sortie, and the commanding officer was there, the meteorology officer, the armored officer, all the senior people were there, and each one gave their little bit of what to expect that night. Well, after the briefing was over, and we had, well, I guess we'd have maybe about 2.5 or so hours before supper, which was, I always found that a rather stressful time, particularly walking back from the flights. Well, you know, this might be the last time I ever walked on that step. I tried to keep those thoughts out of my mind, but they always crept in there, and it was a bit stressful.
The destination was Bucharest, Romania. It was the third most heavily defended area after only Berlin and the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland. Romania was a dangerous place to be sent because the Germans wanted to protect their oil supply. The 32nd flight would prove to be the most dangerous because mistakes were made en route.
We flew at night, and we weren't all at the same heights, but we tried to be in the same place at the same time. And that was a strategy to overwhelm the defenses when we got there, because we all got there at once, and maybe they might get somebody, but they wouldn't get everybody. So, right, we were all up there, and I think it was about 8 o'clock that we all headed for across the Aegean Sea, and it was still daylight then, and you could see the sea, and we could see the coastline as it came up, and when we got to the coastline, see exactly where we were, and I drew a line across to there, and I could figure out, because we didn't hit where we should have done because of the different wind than what the Met had forecast, but that was to be expected, and I got a sort of an average wind, which was a better one to use because it would keep you on track. But of course we had to get back on track again. I drew a line back to the track, and using that wind, gave that course to the pilot, and that was to get us back on track, and it did in a short while. So all seemed to be going pretty well. He was on track. Well, I thought he was anyway. But we started to get off to the right, to the starboard. It seemed a bit unusual, but, well, you know, you never know what the weather is really going to do. And we kept getting more to the right. And I wasn't particularly worried, because that would have been happening to everybody. And right about then, all of the navigators would be working out a course to get back on track again. And that was when he came on the line and said, "I'm sorry, Roy, but I put the wrong course on back there." And give him a course, and that was to take us back on and get us on track, which it did. And all was well, except that we were behind time then. And that's a dangerous place to be. So the pilot had to make a decision of what was he going to do. Was he going to speed up a little bit? Well, it was it was about an 8-hour trip to Bucharest and back, and how much? I think we had about 10 hours fuel. So this was not my decision, but that was the problem that he had. Should he speed up, use more fuel, and maybe run out on the way home, particularly if we run into some bad weather, but that would have got us more into the group. But in the end, he didn't do anything. We continued on behind everybody else. Well, it wasn't a good thing. We were coming up late. But for the moment, all was well. The motors were thundering along, and we were getting closer and closer. All I had to do when I got up there was open the bomb doors, lay down on the rack and look down on the bomb site, and direct the pilot to the right or to the left to get the target coming down. It was kind of like it looked like a little railroad, really. Get the target coming down that railroad, and when it got to the spot on the bomb site, which was time to push the switch, I would do. But I saw the markers come down, and we were right on track. And didn't seem to be. There was quite a bit of searchlights and flak ahead, but for us it was pretty clear, and it seemed to me, well, maybe we're going to get away with it all right. All's well. Well, all wasn't well because the Germans had moved in a bunch of radar and night fighters that we didn't know anything about. On and on we were going, and seemed to be thinking all was well. And the very excited voice of the rear gunner came on. He started to something, I don't know, probably he was saying fight it or something, I don't know. And then he started to scream, I've been hit, I've been hit. And at exactly that same time, there was a terrible pounding as the cannon shells were ripping into the rear end of our aircraft. It just be as if there was some great god of war with a huge hammer hammering at us. Also, at that very same instant, or very few milliseconds afterwards, the cannon shells were coming up from below and going into our outside motor. The fuel lines were broken. The high-test fuel suddenly burst into flame, and the ring was on fire. Well, we were in big trouble. It just lasted for a few minutes. Of course, the fighter was probably going at twice our speed, and he was going by. He'd give us his best shot, and he was going on ahead, and he would be turning around and coming back to finish us off. Well, our pilot had a decision what to do. Should he had a sort of a breathing space. Should he tell the rest of us to bail out? And well, he couldn't. Well, he could have done that, but as far as he was concerned, he was doomed to stay because he had a wounded man, and it's just unthinkable that he would bail out and leave this man to go down by himself. So he would have to try and make a landing, which was a very dangerous business. Anyway, he didn't say anything. So it seemed to me that he had decided that everybody would stay in their positions, and I would keep track of where we were, and the other two gunners would be ready for the fighter when he came back next time. Well, they were having quite a bit of trouble keeping the aircraft level because they had lost the power from that outside motor, and also they were trying to get the fire out, and things got quiet. I didn't notice at first because training is training. I made a notation of the attack, my estimated position or height, and then I noticed it came to me, it was awfully quiet. And it came home to me that what had happened, that our communication system had been put out of action. I was isolated from everybody. I could see the side wing, but I didn't know what was going on. And I'll tell you, the terror was up in my heart then. I didn't know what to do. Well, there was nothing I could do. It was out of control. And practically at that time, the fighter made its second attack. And once again, the pounding and the shells coming up from below with a tracer on them, going this time into the inside motor. Well, I was looking. Well, the inside motor wasn't very far from me. I was just looking straight over at it. Well, I knew that was the end, and right then I started to drop to below, and that's when the pilot's voice came on and said, "Abandon aircraft, abandon aircraft." Well, by then, I had already started to abandon aircraft. I was dropping to my knees. I was halfway down, I think, by then. And of course, lots of things happen when an aircraft goes out of control. We have these G forces. You've heard of them? It's the kind that if you put water in a pail and you swing it around, and the water will stay right in the pail. Only the kind that were affecting me just then were those kind that 1 minute you'd be pinned to the roof and the next to the floor. Only it hadn't got quite that bad. I could just feel it tearing at me. And I had my hands on, I grabbed the handle of the cover of the hole, which was the same one that the front wheel would go out. So it was quite a big hole. Threw the cover to one side and was ready to pull myself down. And that's when these forces really got to me, and I was pulling, and my arms were just not strong. I couldn't get out that last little bit, but I did finally had enough strength, and I pulled myself forward, and out I went. The aircraft was gone, and I went out into that, what you call that void below. Well, it was hardly a void.
It's here that the story returns to Ogama and moves inside the train station. When Roy's plane was shot down, the news was transmitted by telegraph. At 8:20 in the evening on May 11th, 1944, 2 days after Roy's plane had gone missing, the station agent heard the telegraph key sending a message by Morse code. The agent and his family lived in the station, and their living room was adjacent to the telegraph office. The station agent wrote out the message as it came in on the telegraph key. He then typed the message on Canadian Pacific Telegraph paper and personally delivered the message from the RCAF casualties officer to Roy's father, Alex. Regret to advise that your son, Warrant Officer First Class Robert Roy Grier, is reported missing after air operations overseas May 7th. Stop. Letter follows. In a small town, the agent's job was at the station. During the war, when he left the station, people immediately feared the worst.
All of a sudden, I'm below the aircraft in a 185 knot wind coming at me. And that's quite a different situation. Also, I'm falling down, and I did look up. I don't know why, but I saw the two other motors still roaring away. They must have died out pretty quick, but that would have added more thrust to the spiral of the aircraft, and well, nobody could have got out after that. About then, that's when I pulled my strip cord, and I heard a crack like a sound of a high-powered rifle. Well, there was no high-powered rifle. It was my parachute catching in the wind and the shroud tightening. Of course, from going at the same speed as the aircraft, all of a sudden I was practically dead still. The parachute was like an anchor in the sky. And then I came back down. By now I was really a pendulum. Something like a clock pendulum, back and forth, and this took a time, but each time I went slower, and eventually there I was hanging in the sky, nothing happening. But in the beginning, our aircraft over there had turned from a little fire to a big red blazing blast and hit the ground and blew up, and there was silence after that except the occasional very faint explosion of machine gun shells that had canisters must have been scattered on the ground, and as some of them hit, the heat got to them, they blew up. And it was sort of like firecrackers, but except for that, there was no sound at all. Anyway, by then, I was sitting there in the sky. Then, very suddenly, the earth started to rush towards me, and this time I got my knees in the proper position, and I lit on the ground, and there was no jar really, and I gently fell over backwards, and I was on the ground, and I should have been saying a prayer of thankfulness for my escape, but I don't know what it was. But I did notice right away that I didn't have any boots on, and they were these easy on, easy off type, and they had snapped off when the parachute opened, I guess, and they were gone. I don't know where. I had my sock feet, and if at the moment my intention was to walk back to Italy, it was going to be a long walk in sock feet. I didn't have any plan at all. I thought, I kind of hoped, well, maybe I might come along to a farmhouse, and there would be a farmer there who would invite me in, and I'd heard about these partisans, and maybe they would invite me in, and I could hide out there and eventually get back. Well, it wasn't a plan at all. It was just a daydream, really. So I started to walk, and it wasn't too long before I came to a path or a kind of a road, and there was a village ahead, and it kept getting closer until all of a sudden there was the biggest howl you ever did hear. Every dog in the village must have smelt me coming up, and they all welcomed me. Well, I'll tell you, I turned around and started back the other direction in a hurry, and they quit their yelling as soon as I got away. And well, of course, it wasn't much sense in going that way. So I turned and thought, well, I'll go along below the village and perhaps go around it and get back on track. And I walked for a while, and I came to a river, a stream. It had quite steep banks. It was an old stream, not a particularly wide one. I didn't go very far till there was a bridge, a little bridge. And I got up quite close to the bridge. My spirits were up again, things were going my way. And I noticed a bit of action on the bridge. There was somebody on the bridge, and it was a sentry. And he was going back and forth and back and forth. And he must have been looking straight at me, but of course he didn't expect anybody there. And I froze. He turned around and he walked back the other way. Well, I walked the other way too. I ran the other way for a little bit. And he hadn't seen me, I was sure. But then I was walking back over the same track that a few minutes before I'd been on, along the edge of the river. And time had been slipping away, and it was getting towards dawn. And I thought, well, I better hide someplace. And there were trees along the river and bushes, and I came along to a place where there were fairly high trees and some bushes, and I went down the bank a little bit and found a place, and it seemed like a pretty good place to lay down, and I did. And I was exhausted by then. I'd been up all day, and I was adventure in between, and I went to sleep right away. I didn't wake up till about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. I had my Air Force issue right to the second watch, and the seconds went by one, and it took an hour for a minute to go by. And so I sat there all morning, really, just the slowest morning I ever spent in my life. at about 3 o'clock, I heard these voices, and I looked up, and there was a fellow up above me, waving, "Come on up, come on up." And I said, "Germans?" And he said, "Nui Germani, Romani." Well, that sounded to me like, no Germans, Romans, Romanians. And first, when he called me, he said, "Anglisi." I guess he was saying Englishman, eh? Anyway, I walked up the bank, and when I got up there was 3 or 4 fellows up there, and there was quite a little knot of people a little bit further over, and they had a Democrat. You'd know what a Democrat is. It's a buggy, sort of, a 2-wheeled buggy with a team on it, and a fellow had, with the driver. And these people, there were some men and some women, and they had some food, sour sort of cheese, terrible tasting stuff, and some of this black bread, which was even worse. But I ate a little bit of it because, well, they were so nice, and I guess I should do, and I did it. So, but by then, the fellow that owned the Democrat said, "Come on up." Well, he didn't say it. He said, "Come up in the Democrat." And there's 2 seats in the Democrat, first seat and the back seat. I started to go for the back seat. No, front seat for me. I was an honored guest. Everybody had been shaking my hand too up until then. So up in the buggy we got, and we headed back towards the town, which is, I don't suppose it was very far away, but it was over a bit. And I guess we got back to that same track that I'd been on the night before, heading towards town. And by then, there were a whole stream of people coming from the town towards us. I guess the word had got out that there was they knew where somebody was over there. Everybody had come out to see this momentous thing had happened, I guess. And when all these people got coming, I guess I told the driver, "Well, let me down on the ground." And I was walking along beside the Democrat, and the people were coming towards me and shaking my hand, but kept going that way. And then this girl that I was telling you about, she showed up coming this way. And why, she was a lovely looking girl. And she had a nice dress on. And I got up to her, and she turned around then and started walking beside me. And started to try to talk to me like she was talking Romanian. I was talking English, well, you got nowhere. That in high school, I had 4 years of French. I said to her, the first thing I said to her, "You are beautiful." And in French, that two-way bell, there's the 2 kind of languages. There's the language that French people use for ordinary language, and then there's the familiar family language. You heard about that, or you must have learned that too. And she got that all right, because she kind of put her head down and blushed a little bit. And we walked along, and our hands were pretty close together. It wasn't too long. It just happened to touch, and pretty soon we were walking hand in hand. You know, that old boy-girl relationship was there right away. But by then, we were able to talk some, and she asked me, did I have brothers and sisters, and how old I was, and so on. And one of her questions was I married? And I said no. And she wasn't married either, and she wasn't happy. She was not unhappy to hear that. Of course, we kept walking on. We were getting closer and closer to the village, and we were in the village, walking down the path towards the central building, which was the police station, which I found out later. And we got right up in front of it. And the girl, well, I don't know. That was the end of her as far as I'm concerned. I don't remember her again. And there was a couple of soldiers on the step, an ordinary soldier and an officer. The officer went inside, and the soldier beckoned to me to come ahead. Well, my daydreams about partisans were simply that. These people were just peasants. And, they were friendly towards me, but the army officer was not particularly. So I went inside the building, and by then he was sitting at a desk, and there were several people behind him, some ladies and men. I can only assume that they were local people of stature, shall we say. Anyway, they had nothing to do with me, really. And so as the soldier was here, and I was there, he was behind the desk. He got up from the desk and sat on it, and was quite friendly. I hoped I hadn't been hurt and so on, And then he asked me my name, and I told him, and my number, and I told him, and what was our squadron number. Well, I said, I'm sorry, sir, but I can't tell you that because according to the Geneva Convention, a prisoner of war can give you his name and number, and that's it. Well, you're giving you a squadron number, that wouldn't hurt anything. And I give him my line again, sorry, sir. Well, the good cop, that was the good cop line when he was trying to get information from me in a friendly way. And he had a service revolver, and he took out this revolver and he was playing with the cylinder, flipping it around. It was full of shells, and he laid it on the desk, and he said, we've got ways of getting information from the likes of you. And he laid the revolver on the desk, and he stood up again, and he had a beautiful pair of gloves. They had long gauntlets of them, brown gloves. They must have been about that long, but he just had them in his hand, in this hand, and in the other hand, I think he had one of those little short crooks that an officer wears walking around. And he came up in front of me and he said, you will tell me what I want to know. And I didn't say anything. I was getting a bit scared, but he said, you're going to tell me what I want to know. And he slapped me this way and that way and this way with the gloves. It didn't hurt really at all. It did sting, but it didn't hurt. And it wasn't intended to hurt. It was just intended to scare me. And I said, we wouldn't treat a prisoner of war this way. And he stopped right there. He had no intention of hurting me, but he was just doing his job, trying to get information on me. And he stood there for a minute, and he said to the soldier, take him away. And in the morning, food was bought, and eventually I was back in the police station again, and not too long, a truck came along filled with American POWs that had been picked up. They'd been raiding Frosty every day. And at that time, as far as I know, I was the only Canadian. And they took us along to another place where there were a lot more Americans. And we went a little farther to, well, it was really just a corral, which were quite a bunch of prisoners. But there were some RAF, a few, not very many. One especially. And this fellow walked towards me, and Oh, he was in very bad shape. His face was burned, great big blisters. His hands were all blistered. His sleeve was burned off, and this arm, I guess, had blisters. And he said, "Hello, Roy." And it was our waist gunner. And when the fighter had attacked, the bullets had hit our oxygen tanks, and they blew up in his face. And he was disoriented. He really didn't know what was going on. But somehow or other, he must have got to the big window, which was where his gun was mounted, and fell out of the aircraft, and out of sheer something or other pulled the ripcord, and he got to earth. And that fire, which was in his sleeve, had got blown out, or I don't know what, the wind blew it out. Anyway, except for the terrible burns, he wasn't hurt, and he had been picked up by a different group. And he told me that the people the natives that had picked him up had taken him back to where the aircraft was, the burnt-out aircraft, and there were 4 charred bodies there, so there was no doubt what had happened to the crew. Well, then I think we just stayed overnight there, just sat around there, and a whole bunch of us in this corral. And the next day, more trucks came along and loaded us all up and took us to Bucharest. And we just passed through and on, and they took us to the school where we were eventually interned.
Events would change quickly in 1944. In August, the Russians invaded Romania, and Romania changed sides in the war, becoming Allied supporters. For prisoners of war like Roy, it meant release. And Roy, along with some American aviators, were flown back to Italy by the U.S. Air Force.
But after about, I think it was 2 nights, the Russian forces were there. They were on their way. And we were loaded up again and taken to the airport. The Russians weren't there yet, but they were coming. And there were 1 or 2 American B-29s that had landed, ready for us to get in. But for the moment, we were lined up in long rows. There were many, many prisoners. They'd been gathered up from, I guess, all the way from Presley down to where we were. And I was in the G row, which happened to be not very big, and it wasn't too long till our fellows went and got in the aircraft. Just filled right to the brim with fellows sitting everywhere, and we took off and went back to Italy. And I was sent to a RAF station there, and I guess they had to do something with me. So that was pretty close to Foggia, and there's a rail line right across the country to the other side of the country, to about where Vesuvia is. And the next day I went by rail over to Vesuvius. And then I ended up in another holding camp. And there was a standing order at that time that any of those sort of people who had information that would be very good, up-to-date information should be got back to London at once. Yes, I had been a prisoner of war. Yes, I had got back there. Anyway, the commanding officer of that group must have decided, well, okay, put him in. And the way we went, we landed at Algiers, and I suppose they put on more fuel. They didn't go straight to England because they would have had to go over fighting still. They went along the Mediterranean Sea, along south of Italy, south of Spain, out in front of Gibraltar, and then north to England across the Bay of Biscay. That's the direction they went. So after that, we were put on a train and sent straight up to London to get this important information that I didn't have. I didn't have any clothes either. My old ones were thrown away. But I guess I had a pair of coveralls that they'd given me. And I remember being transferred to this other big room in which there were simply hundreds of officers' uniforms. And where they got them was when a crew went on a sortie and didn't come back. All their clothes were still hanging on hangers because they would be just wearing their battle dress. And there was all these, the war had been going on. This was 1944, and the war had been going on since 1939. And I suppose these uniforms had been just collecting. Most of them were practically brand new because most of these fellows had just received their commissions and hadn't had them very long, and they were hanging on hangers in this building, which I had come to, and I was told, well, pick one. You have any one you like. They're sorted out as to the size, but you'll have to get one that suits you. I could have said, no, I won't wear a dead man's uniform, but I never really considered that. I thought, well, here's a nice uniform, I'll take one. So I tried this one and that one on, and finally got a pretty good fit. That's one laying, sitting right here. And that was my uniform. And they didn't have any insignia on them because they had various ranks on them. Some of them might have been squadron leaders, some of them might have been flight lieutenants, some of them might have been pilots, officers, and flying officers. But they were basic tunics. And that's what I wore from then on. Before then, right away I got my insignia was given, then I was a warrant officer 1, and I got my insignia back, and my wing back, and decorations, all that sort of thing. And I was given a leave, and I went on a little holiday to Ireland because I had some relations there, and they had been very nice to me, and I wanted to go back, and I did. And then I came back to London again, and I knew I should visit. Shut it down. Just shut down the thing for a minute.
Sure, we'll stop for a minute.
I should go and visit these two families, the pilot's family and the second pilot's family. I knew I had their address, and I should go and visit them. And I did.
Just take your time, Roy.
I shouldn't have gotten that trick at all.
A October 17th, 1944. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Grier, just a note to say that your son Roy has very kindly paid us a visit here and spent a night with us. He's looking very fit and is naturally looking forward to seeing you all very soon. He's a very nice boy and you have a great credit in him. He came north here especially to tell us how our dear son Peter, along with 4 of his comrades, met his death on that fateful trip. As you know, this is a very painful job for a young boy like him, and my wife and I will always be grateful to him for his kindness in coming. Needless to say, all of us here are heartbroken at the loss of our dear boy, and the thought that we shall never see him again is unbearable. All we have left are proud and happy memories, but time may heal our wounds. I trust you are well, and I am sure you will have a great welcome awaiting Roy. Yours very sincerely, Tom Bissett.
Perhaps it's appropriate in ways that I hadn't thought about to have the cenotaph in Ogama located adjacent to the train station. It pays tribute to the men from Ogama District who didn't come home from the World Wars. Their story is told here in stone. But by telling his story and writing his story, Roy has ensured that we have a better appreciation for what he went through and the suffering that he endured. Roy is a brave man to this day. I want to thank Roy for telling his story and for sharing it with all of us. And I want to thank his sons and daughter for helping to bring his story to life. In closing, I want to thank you for joining us on Tracking History.
I'm looking round, looking up, looking in, and all I see is new. I don't mind, I don't know, I just wonder what is true. Can you see, can you see, can you see what I can do? Can't you see, can't you see, don't I see the same as you? Where did I come from? Where will I go? Will I stay there? Or will I make it home? Will I make it home? He's looking round, looking down, looking out, and all he sees is wrong. He does mind and wants to fix it. That's been his goal all along. And can you see how he's fought so hard and long? Can't you see, can't you see, before the sight is gone? Where did he come from? And where will he go? Will he stay there? Or will he make it home? Will he make it home? They're looking round, looking big, looking small. They have a story to tell of their lives. It's their past now, how they stood up after they fell. Do you see, do you see, or does their story not sell? Can't you see, can't you see, how they have been through hell? Where did they come from? Where will they go? Will they stay there? Or will they make it home? Where did they come it home.